Okay, so this is probably the last in the series of Vasari tutorials that are run for a while. And again, what we're wanting to do, so we've done the initial mass modeling, we've done a little bit of work in terms of looking at wind and solar radiation. And now what we need to do is really get in and start some basic fine tuning of the project in terms of the energy simulation. And again, we're really thinking about this as an early conceptual design piece. So I'm not going to get too far into creating custom windows, things like that. Percentage of glazing is still fine, but adding some shading to the glazing, doing some basic steps to see how those will modify the energy consumption are we're at the level where that type of thing might be pretty important. So if you'll first notice, I do have an error going on with the site satellite photograph. That's been an ongoing error that we've been seeing in Vasari beta. One of the new things that we found is re-import satellite image. Seems to usually be working pretty well as a quick fix rather than simply going back through the location mark. So that's another thing that we can do. So let's get into looking specifically at tweaking this small little building in terms of the simulation that we're going to run. So I'm going to go to the Analyze tab, and I'm going to look at the energy settings. And we can see, first of all, that this is set to an office right now, and this is a train station or a transportation hub. And obviously the difference there is with the transportation hub, we're going to greatly increase the number of occupants in the building, and that's going to have a pretty dramatic cost in terms of the building's energy. The next thing that we want to do is we want to go down to conceptual constructions. I'm going to click edit on that. And there are a couple of things that I want to change. First of all, Tennessee is not what I would call a typical mild climate. We want to go lightweight construction, cold climate. The next thing we want to do is our mass roof, typical insulation. We'd really rather have high insulation, cool roof. Again, that type of climate with fairly severe temperature swings is going to justify more insulation. On the glazing, let's go ahead and switch this out to a higher performance glass, so a high performance low E. And I'm going to say, okay, so I've done some things to pretty dramatically modify the overall enclosure, and I'm going to click OK. Now, the next thing that I want to notice is these windows right here are facing south-southwest. So they are prime opportunities for some shading devices on the glazing, and that is there is an automatic tool built in to help resolve that. So one of the things that we can do, but again, I don't want to do shading devices all the way around. That's really not going to help me any at all. But I can come in and say, you know, perhaps on this piece right here, we want a little bit less glazing, and we want to start doing some shading devices. So again, I'm going to hover my cursor over the center mass, and I'm going to use the tab key, and that's going to alternate through my different selections. And you'll see one of those selections is that southwest facing part of the facade. So I'm going to click on that to select it. Once it's highlighted, I can left click on it to select it. In that face's properties, I can change its overall values away from being the overall energy settings to by surface. So now this, rather than taking the overall averages, it's going to look at specific settings for that surface. So for instance, I could say I want the glazing at 80%. When I hit apply, you'll see it's a huge window now. By the same token, I can take that down to, let's say, 20% and apply. Much smaller. And I can also say it is shaded with something that has a 4-foot overhang. And I get that sort of automatically built into the construction. So let's use that as a basic setting. But let's go sort of one step further. I want to go ahead and change that back up to about 50% with the large shading device. Maybe that needs to come out even further. Let's bring it out about 6 feet. And I know that ultimately in my planning for something like that, I'm going to need to build a piece that's beyond just a window shade. I actually want some kind of design element that's going to wrap around each one of those surfaces. So I can do that same thing with these two edge pieces. I'm going to change it away from by energy settings, by surface. I'm going to keep that side and shade the glazing, in this case, with a 5-foot overhang. By surface, shading, 5 feet. So I've got a series of changes made, and I'm ready to rerun the simulation. Except let's go ahead and let's look at actually eliminating the glass altogether on sort of these west facades. And that should have a pretty dramatic result as well in terms of the energy simulation. So again, I'm going to hover over, use my tab key, select that surface, by surface, and this time I'm going to set my percentage of glazing all the way down to 0. Same thing for this guy. By surface, 0. Apply. So I've got some different things that I've applied, and I am ready to run the simulation on this particular project now. So I'm going to go ahead and say Analyze Mass Model. And upload that to the cloud for the 30-year building analysis, energy analysis. So while that's going, the other types of changes that you can make on something like this, I'm curious as to whether or not I could take this building and rotate it around. So these particular pieces of glass, rather than facing south-southwest, which we know is fairly intense sun, maybe I can get those more south-southeast. So to make that kind of change, I'm actually going to need to back all the way to the mass form. I don't want to move the side around. Whoops. Let's use the select and control to get each group. Rotate. And let's rotate that out of the south. And I'm going to send it about 60 degrees so that they're facing more south-southeast. Now I know that means I'm going to have to edit my connection to the railroad tracks. I know that there's some pretty large design implications, but I also know that, again, if I go back to my mass surfaces, that might have a dramatic result in terms of the building energy, just in that simple change. So we'll go ahead and run that one as well. And I'm just going to name this one Rotate 60. So if we look at the results from the first test that we ran, again, small train station, about 2,200 square feet, 8 people. Oh, this is actually set for an office, I believe, right now, if there's only 8 people. Yeah, I'm looking at a different project. Here we go. Analysis 1, Site 1. 108 people. There, that's better. Still only 2,000 square feet. And we can actually kind of compare those two really quick because that was an office. 108 people, $230,000 of operating cost over 30 years. Just the change from an office, only 8 people, same building, same footprint, 93,000. So that use group makes a significant change in terms of the data. But then going through, we can look at, again, a lot of different data that's available. In particular, paying attention to what our net CO2 is, what our potential for energy creation is right here, and what we need to start doing in terms of designers to start working towards a zero carbon footprint. This is going to give you all that initial data to really start diving into that. So let's just take a look at the difference that a 60-degree rotation makes. See, we're 237 versus 230. It actually is costing us more to do that rotation. So that sort of simple iterative mode of experimentation begins to set up some basic guidelines. And the more you do with this, the more you start working through it, the more you can start to really understand what are the right ways and wrong ways that we can start cutting costs in terms of energy performance, how well the building can perform, as well as getting into this notion of early on in the design process, what parameters can I establish to improve the design thinking? How can I use this as a programming tool to really influence the direction that I'm going to take the design?